me today for another episode on the Anchor to Messiah program right here on HRN Revive TV. Today's episode is titled Sharp as a Tent Peg, and this will be part 1. I know you've heard the old saying, sharp as a tack, and of course this phrase doesn't have just one definition, but many expressions are used to define the phrase sharp as a tack. This phrase may sound a little unusual, but I hope in this presentation I can bring out some real life applications from a spiritual perspective. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verses 11, the words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. So, why would being sharp as a tent peg have anything to do with the believer in Yeshua? What does that even look like? I would say, just in my opinion, that it means to have a cutting edge about who you are in Messiah, meaning to be steady and faithful to the kingdom of Yahweh and to those around you. And lastly, to be immovable and to be constant like a rock. So, before going any further, the first thing we need to do is define what a tent peg is. It comes from the Strong's number H3489, from an unused root meaning to pin through or fast, a peg, nail, paddle, pin, or stake. Also, a tent peg in Hebrew is a vav, a picture of a tent peg. And the vav is the 6th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and its numerical value equals the number 6, which represents man, since man was created on the 6th day. And the vav also functions as a Hebrew prefix for the word and, A-N-D. And the vav is also known as a connector or a hook, which was used to assemble the Mishkan for fastening, securing, and hooking things, and so on. According to Samson Raphael Hirsch's etymological Hebrew dictionary, the Hebrew word for peg is yathed, and it's spelled yod, tav, and dalet. And the Hebrew meaning is to secure, and that's the word that we'll probably be zooming in on as we go through this presentation and the next one. Also, it's an instrument used for hole digging, and the last entry in Raphael Hirsch's dictionary defines it as a sharpened tent peg. So we know to drive a pin, a peg, or a stake into the ground, the object has to be sharpened in order to be able to cut through the earth. In Hebrews chapter 4 and 12 it reads, "For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart." A few weeks back, my pastor, Mark McClendon of River of Life congregation of Lucedale, Mississippi, mentioned, and I'll paraphrase, how we should be standing firm and holding down our spiritual position as a believer in the Messiah. And to add to that, one of the elders of the assembly came forth and brought out a good point regarding how our bodies are made up of earth and how we are spiritually responsible in maintaining the 2 square feet that our 2 feet stand on. So, in other words, we have to take our own little piece of space that appears so small to the physical eye, but is spiritually huge. Alluding to that, we need to ensure that we are properly and spiritually grounded in what we believe in and stand for. But to do that, we have to have a cutting edge, spiritually speaking. So, if there is one thing we have the responsibility of doing, that is to be accountable and liable for our own piece of land, hinting at this earthy vessel from our head to our feet. We can either become dry and crusty mud or pliable clay. And as you already know, a tent peg won't stay firmly grounded in crusty mud. So to sum up what I'm trying to say is this: we need to hold our ground individually. And if not, we'll lose it spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. So what can all this mean spiritually? I'm sure it can mean a lot of things if we dig deeper, and spiritually speaking, I hope to unearth some things that can apply to our lives. Over the past few months, I've been on a work project with the railroad company in our local area, and I've been assisting them with many things, and I've assisted them with my equipment. And on this project, they are replacing new cross ties with the old. And we know to fasten or connect steel rails to cross ties, you have to use railroad spikes with a sharpened point, which will secure the rails tightly to the tie plate. Wikipedia defines a railroad spike as this: roughly chiseled shape with the flat edge point in which the spike is driven with the edge perpendicular to the grain, which gives greater resistance to loosening. The main function is to keep the rail engaged. So, over the past few weeks, I have watched these railmen aggressively drive those spikes into each wooden cross tie with a steel maul or hammer. And as I observed their efforts in doing so, it made me liken to myself to the spike, the tent peg, as I watched every swing of the maul come down harshly on top of the spike. And I thought about the pressure and the pain that the spike endures so that it firmly penetrates the wood to secure it and to keep the tracks stable, which plays a significant role in the building and rebuilding process. And John chapter 16 and verse 33 reads, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So just as we are the body of Messiah, the temple, and the tabernacle of David, we have to endure pain and pressure, and sometimes we do it alone and together as a whole. And all the while, Yahweh is driving us into a firm position. He's setting us up for a purpose. But to be firmly driven into the position, you and I have to undergo some pain, pressure, and much tribulation. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verses 58, it reads, Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. So, to bring this session to a close, I want to end with this. Being a spiritual tent peg isn't easy. It may look insignificant. The tent peg itself may look insignificant and small in size, but it comes with a price, pain, and purpose. And let's go to Matthew chapter 7 and verses 14, and it reads, For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Also in Ezra chapter 9 and verses 8 it reads, But now for a brief moment favor has been shown by the Lord our God to leave us a remnant and to give us a secure hold within His holy place, that our God may brighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our slavery. I like what this commentator writes. It comes from the Faith Life Study Bible, and he writes, Hebrew term refers to a tent peg or stake. Just as the erecting of a tent begins with the stake driven into the ground, the rebuilding of the nation of Israel is begun with the escaped remnant serving as the initial foothold. So, my words to you today is this: be the tent peg that Yahweh desires you to be. Take a foothold of your piece of ground spiritually and physically, because every believer in Yeshua is a representation of a tent peg, a hook, and or connector that makes up the entire body of Messiah. Yahweh is rebuilding the fallen tabernacle of David into the spiritual house of Israel. He's building an army, an everlasting kingdom that can never be divided again. So being sharp as a tent peg involves taking on pain and pressure, but not necessarily alone, but together in oneness. Again, each believer is a picture of a vibe, a tent peg, a connector, a supporter of the entire tent, the body Messiah, that holds each of us together like spiritual glue. So take this time to build one another up and not tear down. And of course, we could go on and on here. And so there will be more in part 2 as we continue on with this subject. So please, again, join us next time. And as always, I hope you have enjoyed today's teaching and have gleaned something from it. And until next time, shalom.